We're live. If you will pull out your bulletins, there is a white page in there that has kind of our outline, and I want to begin this morning as we continue this series from the I am statements that Jesus gave by looking at John chapter 10, verses 9 to 18. Now, verse 9 is going to be a review of last week, and then it'll move right into the passage for today. Verse 9, I am the gate. This is Jesus talking. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. We looked at that last Sunday. But he continues on with this shepherding, this theme. And in verse 11, he continues, I am the good shepherd. So we have that I am starts out each of these phrases that Jesus uses. And the I am, if you will remember, was those two words were the words that God gave Moses when Moses asked, who should I tell the people in Egypt sent me? And God's response was, I am, the great I am, the self-existent, eternal God. And now Jesus picks up that title for the purpose of letting everybody know, I'm God. I am the Son of God. And it was a statement that caused a lot of trouble for Jesus. It got the Jews in an uproar. It caused them to pick up stones and want to throw him and kill him because he was claiming to be God. And then he, several different times in the book of John, adds then, I am, and he fills that in. Last week it was, I am the gate. Earlier it was, I am the light of the world. And this morning, he says a couple of different times, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Now there's another group of leaders out there that aren't like that. Verse 12, the hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away, this hired hand, because he is a hired hand and cares really nothing for the sheep. He's just in it for the paycheck. Comes back in verse 14 and says it again. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. Don't miss that. That is really important. And then he repeats again something he said earlier, and you didn't hear it the first time or the second time, I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. In context, he is talking to a bunch of Jews. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me, if you didn't hear it the first 3 times, is that I lay down my life. Now he adds, only to take it up again. So there's not just death, but there's also now resurrection in the picture, in the prophecy. No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. this command to lay it down and raise it up, I received from my Father. So Jesus in this passage is giving two vivid illustrations of who he is. We saw last time, I am the gate, and now the good shepherd. And in this, of course, one of the things he's doing two things, two big things. The first thing he's doing is he's setting himself as the leader of the people in contrast to the bad leaders that have been really, really off track and off base in their leadership. If you remember the context, I set this up a few weeks ago. John chapter 9, which is the foundation, the background for this whole speech that Jesus has given, there was this huge event that happened. Jesus heals this man, blind from birth, but he does it on the Sabbath, which is apparently a big no-no. And the religious leaders are so upset. They find the guy, they sit him down, and they interrogate him. And then they're so distraught with what this healed blind man is saying about Jesus that they literally kick him out of the church. They excommunicate him from the synagogue. That's the kind of shepherds they are. That's why Jesus doesn't really call them shepherds. He calls them thieves. He calls them hired hands. And so part of what Jesus is doing is he's going to show the goodness of who he is. And as often is the case, he's going to do it by contrasting himself with just how bad the religious leaders have been. And that isn't just a current thing. That was a thing. If you want to read about bad leadership, just read the Old Testament. There's case after case after case of the religious leaders not really caring for the sheep, using their positions for power and personal advancement. And they were unfaithful to God, and they were unfaithful in leading their sheep. So there's that contrast that he brings out in verses 12 and 13 about the hired hand. Jesus says, I'm not like that. The second thing Jesus is doing with this good shepherd metaphor, I am the good shepherd. Well, where else have we heard about God being a shepherd? Is that a new thing that Jesus is just bringing up for the very first time? It's not. I mean, one of the most famous Psalms is the 23rd Psalm. How does that start? Somebody ought to be able to tell me how that starts. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Goes on how the Lord leads him. You just need to know, and I'm not going to take the time to do this, but there is a whole theme throughout the Old Testament of God presenting himself as the shepherd of the people, the good shepherd of the people. So once again, like Jesus has done with every one of these I am statements, he is doing it again here. When he says, I am the good shepherd, you better know that those Jews sitting there listening to this speech says, he's doing it again. He's equating himself to be equal with God. He is telling us that he thinks he is God in the flesh. That's good news for us, but to them, it sounded like bad news, and they were upset. Well, this morning, I just want to unpack. We're going to do this in 2 weeks. Focus on Jesus as the Good Shepherd. So this is part 1 of 2. But there's 3 things I want to point out if you want to follow along in your bulletins. We don't have fill in the blanks. I kind of filled them in for you. But 3 things that stood out to me as I meditated and studied this passage this week. Jesus is our Good Shepherd because why? Well, there's 3 things that stand out. First of all, as he repeated 4 different times in this passage, he is the good shepherd because he lays down his life for the sheep. In contrast to the hired hands that when any kind of danger comes, they jump over the gate and run for their lives and leave the sheep to fend for themselves. Jesus says, I'm not that way. I lay down my life for the sheep. And of course, he's referencing a prophecy forward here to the cross, where he is literally going to do that for us, for the sheep. There's an allusion here, I think. Who other than God, who was the most famous shepherd in the Old Testament? David. And you might remember that there's a scene where David, young David, early on in the story of David, is getting ready to go. The army of Israel is fighting against the Philistines, and there's the big giant, what's his name? Goliath, and everybody's scared to death of him. And young David, the shepherd boy, takes a little vacation from the sheep, goes and finds where the battle's going on, sees that everybody in the army is scared to death, and he says, I'll take him on. And the king Saul says, well, what are your credentials? And he tells him, he says, I shepherd a flock, and when the lion and the bear came, I killed them. I took them on. I didn't run away. I took them on and I protected the flock. Well, Jesus is, he's from the line of David. There was the prophecy that one would come and sit on David's throne. It's Jesus. He's fulfilling this image of the good shepherd from the Father, from the Old Testament, from David. Now, there's a couple of way things are worded in this. I gave my life for my sheep. I lay down my life for my sheep. There's a couple of things I want you to see here that are very, very important. First of all, if you were to have witnessed, if you would have been there 2,000 years ago, and you would have witnessed all of the events, that you would have been a human being standing there in Jerusalem when Jesus was crucified, and if you would have followed the trials, and had that insight, been able to do that, if you had been able to walk with Jesus as he carried his cross and then, couldn't even carry it anymore and they had to have Simon carry it the rest of the way. And if you would have seen how brutally he was beaten and whipped and tortured, and then if you would have seen him nailed to the cross, the whole thing, you would have said, man, this is one unfortunate dude. This is a guy who got on the wrong side of the Jewish leaders. This is a guy who got on the wrong side of the Roman leaders, and they put him under their foot and they just stomped his life out. Snuffed it right out. This poor, unfortunate man, he had such a good thing going. I mean, he was healing people. He was teaching. He was casting out demons. He was preaching like we'd never heard before with such authority and power. And just like that, these human governments got together and they snuffed out his life. What a tragedy. But man, these are some powerful people he messed with. That's the human perspective. But did you notice in this passage, Jesus says something different's going on. You see, his life was not taken from him. His life was given for us. Verse 18, he says it. No one takes it, my life. No one takes it from me. There's another place when they're heading down the home stretch of Jesus' life. He says, don't you think I could, in a second, call down angels from heaven? And this thing would be over? You want to look at the power of Jesus, read the book of Revelation and how the battles at the end times are going to go when he comes, not as the one who gives his life for the world, but as the one who returns to set up his final kingdom. Look at how those battles go. Jesus is in complete control of what's going on here. God is allowing evil men to do their evil stuff, just like he did with Pharaoh in the Old Testament, just like he did with the nation of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. He uses evil men even uses them for his own purposes. But God is in control. Jesus is in complete control. He is there, and he's simply doing what he came to do. In fact, it says there, he's doing what his Father, the command he gave him. This, Jesus, is your mission. To lay down your life. He says this is why the Father loves me, because I am the obedient sacrificial sacrifice that redeems the world. This is the plan of the ages. So he lays down his life for us. What does that mean? Just to be clear, this is a reference not just to some random death. He died for his sheep. Well, why did he need to die for his sheep? Well, the theological reason, the biblical reason is not because wolves and bears were coming in for the attack. That's just metaphor. That's just a word picture. He had to die for us because we had sinned. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That's just a few chapters earlier in John. And so he came, and the wages of sin is death. I'm thinking Romans, not John here. The wages of sin is death. We were in danger of death, of eternal, get this now, just hold on a second, eternal separation from God forever after we die. That was what was hanging in the balance. And Jesus came and said, I am going to come and die for my sheep. That little word in verse 6:15, I lay down my life for the sheep. That little word for, you might not think it's significant, but it literally means in the place of. It's the picture of substitution. They sinned and brought the judgment of God upon themselves, and they deserve to be separated from God. But because God's heart is full of love, and because of my love for the world, I came and I am to lay down my life. I'm going to die to take the punishment for sin that they deserve, that they brought on themselves, and I'm taking it upon myself. Of course, you know that's the essence of the gospel, but I just remind you, that's what he's talking about when he says, I lay down my life for my sheep. He dies for our sins, that we might not spend eternity separated from God, but the good news of the gospel, we might spend now and eternity in deep fellowship with God. And that leads to point number 2 from our text today. Jesus is our good shepherd because, as he states in verses 14 and 15, he knows us and he invites us to know him back. Now, I've said this many times in my years here, because this word know comes up a lot. And I just want to remind you once again, every time you see that word know in the context of a relationship between us and God, it is not talking about mere intellectual information, facts that can be memorized. This is a term of intimate relationship. This is a term of love. This is not to know about somebody. This is to really deeply live in a knowing and being known relationship with somebody. And so he says, I don't just know some things about my sheep. I know them intimately. And I invite them to know me intimately. Friends, that is what the gospel is, an invitation into. A relationship with Jesus. And then he says, just so you're clear on this, I'm going to give you the foundation out of which this I know the sheep and the sheep know me comes from. He says, verse 15, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. Well, we are in deep waters now, because now we are talking about the relationship, the eternal relationship between the Father and the Son that goes backwards in eternity to eternity past. And you have to ask yourself, what was going on before God created the world for all eternity? Well, what was going on was a love relationship dynamic between the Father and the Son that existed for all eternity. And I've preached on this. I've done a whole series on this, but I just want to remind you about this. So God is not a single person, right? God is a Trinity. We just sang beautifully about it a couple of different times earlier in our singing about the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. God is a dynamic being who lives in this inner relationship of love amongst the members of the Trinity. And what happened in creation was that God said, this is too good to keep to ourselves. This kind of love that we have for one another, Father to Son, Son to Father, we gotta get some others in on this thing. I'm going to create a whole world. And I'm going to invite them to participate in this love relationship where people know me deeply, God says, and where people will love each other deeply. It's the whole reason why we exist. C.S. Lewis, writing about this dynamic of the Trinity, referred to it as a dance. Like the Father and the Son were in this relationship, and he equates it to like this dynamic dance that they're doing. And what he says is, the gospel is the Trinity turning to humanity and saying, come on in. Join us in this dance, in this love relationship. And so I just want to ask you this morning, all that's kind of flowery and big, and maybe it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around, but here's the bottom line that I want to say to you this morning. I hate religion. I have come to hate religion and just going through the motions of religious practices. Quit it! Die to it! This isn't about religion and doing religious duties and all of that. This is about Jesus saying, come and get to know me. Come and dive deeply into my love and know me like I know you. This is why Jesus was so upset with the religious leaders, because they were so into all this other stuff that wasn't about the relationship. They thought it was, but they were just deceived. So dive deep. What do you mean, Pastor Mike? I'm just saying dive deep into this relationship. Pray more. Dig into the Word more. Not just to read it, but to every time you open it to say, God, speak to my heart through your Word. My heart is open. Final point this morning. And this is big in light of the day that we live in. This is big in light of what you see every day in the last 2 weeks when you turn on the news. You got to ask yourself the question, well, who exactly are these sheep? And Chad, I don't know how you do it, but once again this morning you prepared the way for us, and we didn't talk about this, but there were the second to the last song, I think, there was this reference to different languages and tribes and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember exactly, but I'm like, okay, God, you're setting this up. Thank you. Because here it is. Who is Jesus talking to? Well, you got to get the context. Jesus in the moment is talking to a group of Jewish people who are under the impression that God only cares about them. They are the chosen people, and they think that the Messiah, who they think Jesus might be at this point, at least the followers, the disciples. Now the religious leaders, they're pretty convinced he's not. But the point is, the Jews think that the Messiah is only coming for them. They alone are his sheep, the sheep of his fold. And then there's this almost incidental little statement we find in the middle of our passage today, that if you were sitting there as a Jew in that moment, it would have blown you away. It would have made your jaw drop. It would have made you go, oh, whoa, 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 wait a minute.